Is that plastic? My daughter-in-law Lauren laughed, lifting my hand higher so everyone could see the ring. Brian, your wife shops at flea markets. The investor, Ethan Caldwell, suddenly went pale. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the stone. Then he whispered my father's name. My heart stopped. Brian slowly turned toward me. Lauren's smile froze. And in that very second, I took off the ring and placed it on the table. I'm glad you're here. Before I tell you what happened next, take a moment to like this story, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I always read them. Because that dinner changed everything. That evening had started perfectly normal. We were at a rooftop restaurant in Boston, the kind where the air smells faintly of citrus polish and expensive perfume. Lauren had organized what she called a celebration dinner. Her startup had secured a possible $50 million investment, and this was her moment to shine. Brian looked proud. Almost relieved. Lauren looked radiant, glowing in a way that comes from knowing all eyes are on you. Her parents sat upright and attentive. 2 board members leaned forward whenever Ethan spoke. And Ethan Caldwell, the investor everyone was trying to impress, carried himself with the calm authority of a man who decides futures with a signature. I remember standing in the restroom before dinner began, smoothing the fabric of my navy dress in the mirror. It was simple. Structured. Elegant without trying to compete. I told myself quietly, just be polite. Smile. Support your husband. That had been my role for years. When I returned to the table, champagne was already being poured. Glasses clinked. The skyline shimmered beyond the railing, city lights blinking like distant signals. Lauren stood to give her speech. She spoke about grit. About sacrifice. About building something from nothing. She emphasized earning everything yourself, never relying on legacy, never hiding behind a powerful name. The irony did not escape me. But I applauded. Softly. Sincerely. I had no idea that everything was about to fracture. The music drifted gently across the rooftop. A string quartet played something light and forgettable. The scent of butter and rosemary rose from the plates as servers moved with quiet efficiency. It felt like any other carefully curated family dinner. My ring, the pink diamond my father gave me the day I left home, caught the candlelight each time I reached for my glass. I wore it rarely, but that evening something compelled me to slip it on before leaving the house. I did not know it would become the center of the table. Conversation moved easily. Lauren described expansion plans. Brian added supportive commentary. Ethan listened more than he spoke, occasionally asking precise questions that made everyone sit straighter. I watched him. I have spent enough years around investors to recognize how they evaluate risk. It is not only numbers they examine. It is posture. Tone. Silence. They measure rooms the way surgeons measure heartbeats. And then Lauren reached across the table. Her fingers wrapped around my wrist lightly, almost affectionately. I thought she was going to compliment the ring. Instead, she lifted my hand. Is that plastic? She laughed. The moment shifted. At first, it sounded like teasing. But Lauren does not do anything without intention. Her laughter was calibrated. Light enough to pass as humor. Sharp enough to position me. She wanted Ethan to see me as harmless. Outdated. Slightly embarrassing. In her world, image is currency. And older women with understated jewelry do not enhance valuation. I felt heat rise to my face, but I did not pull away. I met Ethan's eyes. And that is when everything changed. He stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. His gaze locked onto the stone. The candlelight struck the pale pink center, and recognition flashed across his face, not curiosity, not amusement. Recognition. That was when he whispered my father's name. Not as a question. As a fact. The sound was barely audible, yet it carried more weight than Lauren's laughter. Brian heard it. Lauren heard it. And so did I. In that instant, I understood something Lauren did not. The danger was no longer social. It was financial. If Ethan connected me publicly to my father's private equity empire, scrutiny would follow. Media would dig. Regulators would look closer at every funding round, every transfer, every vendor. And there were things Lauren did not want examined. I felt my pulse steady instead of accelerate. Fear can do that when it is familiar. My father once told me that power reveals itself in quiet moments, not loud declarations. So I removed the ring. Not angrily. Not defensively. Calmly. I placed it on the table between the wine glasses, letting the candlelight rest on it openly. Lauren's smile froze. Brian turned to me slowly. And the evening, which had begun with celebration, began its descent into something else entirely. When Ethan whispered my father's name, it was not nostalgia in his voice. It was calculation. He did not look impressed. He looked alarmed. That is the difference between someone discovering wealth and someone discovering exposure. Lauren sensed it immediately. I watched her posture shift, shoulders tightening, smile sharpening, eyes moving quickly between Ethan and me as if recalculating a strategy mid-game. Is something wrong? She asked lightly, though the pitch of her voice had risen half a note. Ethan did not answer her right away. He kept looking at the ring resting on the white tablecloth, candlelight passing through the pink diamond in quiet pulses. I knew a man who wore one similar to that, he said carefully. A very specific cut. Not common. My throat felt dry, but I did not rush to explain. In rooms like this, explanations are admissions. Brian cleared his throat. It's just jewelry, he said, attempting to shrink the moment. Just jewelry. For years, I had allowed him to believe that about me. Lauren leaned forward, attempting to regain control. Vintage pieces can look dramatic under restaurant lighting, she said with a soft laugh. We were just joking. But Ethan's eyes had not left my face. I don't think this is vintage, he said. Silence settled over the table. Even the music seemed farther away. And in that silence, the real threat unfolded in my mind. If Ethan publicly connected my identity to my father's private equity firm, headlines would follow. Analysts would start drawing lines between legacy capital and Lauren's startup. Competitors would whisper about influence. Regulators would demand disclosures. Lauren's carefully built narrative of being entirely self-made would fracture. And if regulators began reviewing transactions, especially vendor contracts, certain patterns might surface. Silver Ridge Consulting. The shell company I had quietly researched months ago. Funds routed in clean, unobtrusive amounts. Invoices that described strategic advisory services but offered no measurable deliverables. Lauren believed no one was watching. She had underestimated two people. The first was Ethan. The second was me. Ethan finally sat back in his chair, though his expression remained tense. I'm going to take a call, he said calmly. He rose without finishing his champagne. Lauren stood almost immediately. I'll join you, she added too quickly. They disappeared toward the private stairwell at the edge of the rooftop. Brian turned to me. What did you do? He whispered. Not what is happening. Not are you okay? What did you do? I looked at him for a long moment. I wore my ring, I replied. His jaw tightened. If this affects the deal. There it was. Not concern for me. Concern for valuation. My hands were steady now. Fear had already moved through me and settled into clarity. I didn't say anything, I continued. He recognized something. Brian's voice lowered. Recognized what? I did not answer. Because if I answered fully, I would have to admit that I had spent months quietly investigating his wife. And that I had found enough to end this evening long before Lauren lifted my hand. While Brian stared at the skyline, I opened my phone under the table. The documents were still there. Saved in a secure folder under a name no one would suspect. Transfer records. Corporate filings. Incorporation dates. Silver Ridge Consulting was formed within 48 hours of Lauren's Series B funding announcement. Its registered agent was her personal assistant. Its address traced back to a shared workspace rented under a third-party name. Payments flowed in consistent intervals, small enough not to alarm investors, large enough to accumulate. If disclosed publicly, it would not look like strategic consulting. It would look like diversion. Ethan returned alone. Lauren followed seconds later, her expression tightly controlled. He did not sit immediately. Instead, he remained standing at the head of the table. Before we continue discussions, he said evenly, I need clarification regarding certain vendor relationships tied to your company. The board members exchanged brief glances. Lauren smiled, composed, poised. Of course. Transparency is very important to us. Ethan's gaze shifted toward me briefly. Then back to her. Specifically, Silver Ridge Consulting. The air changed. Lauren's fingers tightened around her glass. That's a legitimate advisory partner, she replied smoothly. My heart did not race. Because now the danger had shifted. It was no longer about my identity. It was about hers. And I understood something with absolute certainty in that moment. She had tried to make me small in order to control the room. But she had accidentally illuminated the one detail that could dismantle her entirely. Power rarely announces itself loudly. Sometimes it rests quietly on a white tablecloth. Waiting. My hands began to shake the way they used to when I was 19, before I learned how to keep my fear from showing on my face. It wasn't dramatic. It was small. A faint tremor in my fingers, a tightening at the base of my throat, the strange metallic taste that always arrives when my body recognizes danger before my mind gives it a name. I kept my palms flat against my lap under the table, willing them to be still. Across from me, Brian stared at Ethan as if waiting for someone else to fix what was happening. Lauren sat very straight, her smile still present but no longer warm. It had become a mask, thin, precise, and ready to crack if anyone touched it. And in that moment, I remembered another table. Another room where a man decided something about my life without raising his voice. My father's office had always smelled like paper and polished wood. Not the pleasant scent of an old library, but something sharper, ink, leather, the faint medicinal bite of aftershave. He kept the blinds half closed even in daylight, as if sunlight might reveal too much. I was 19 the night he called me in and shut the heavy door behind me. He didn't sit. He stood by the window with a folder in his hand, the kind of folder that meant decisions had already been made. They will love you for what you have, he said, not for who you are. I remember the way he said it, calmly, as if he were explaining weather. He was the founder of an empire people rarely spoke about in public. Private equity. Infrastructure. Logistics. Quiet ownership that didn't need billboards. Ports, rail systems, warehouses, contracts that made entire regions move. Men shook his hand and smiled, then went home and feared him in private. After my mother died, he became a different man. More guarded. More suspicious. He started locking things away that had never been locked before, documents, accounts, phone calls. Even affection became something rationed. He loved me, I never doubted that, but love in our house came wrapped in conditions and warnings. That night, he told me he had arranged a trust. A generous one. One that would make my life effortless. And then he told me I would not be allowed to touch it. Not yet, he said. Not until you can prove you can live without it. I laughed, because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He stepped closer and held out a small velvet box. Inside was the ring, pale pink, understated, cut in a way that didn't flash like new money. It looked almost modest until light hit it properly, and then it caught fire. My mother wore this, he said. Now you will. I slid it onto my finger with the reverence of a girl who still believed gifts were simply gifts. Then his voice lowered. You will leave with no introductions. No access. No favors. You will build a life that doesn't depend on my name. I told him that sounded like punishment. He said it was protection. If a man chooses you, he continued, I want him choosing you. Not your inheritance. Not the doors my name can open. He made me promise. I promised, because I was young and eager to believe that loyalty would be returned in the same language it was asked. 2 weeks later, I moved to Chicago. I changed industries. I took work that paid modestly. I lived in an apartment where the radiators clanged at night and the hallway always smelled faintly of someone else's cooking. I learned how to stand in grocery lines without anyone stepping aside for me. I learned how to answer questions about my background with half-truths that sounded complete. And the strangest part was that I liked it. There was a clean simplicity to being unknown. No one expected anything from me except what I could do with my own hands and mind. I paid my own rent. I fixed my own problems. I bought my own furniture, second-hand pieces that squeaked and carried other people's histories. When I met Brian, it was in that smaller life. He was kind in the way men can be kind when they believe you need nothing from them. He listened. He laughed easily. He touched my shoulder when he spoke, as if I were something precious rather than useful. He never asked about my father. He never asked why my upbringing sounded careful and vague. And I told myself that meant he loved me for me. Now, sitting at that rooftop table, watching him look at me with accusation instead of concern, I felt something settle in my chest with quiet finality. My father had been wrong about many things. But not about that. In moments like this, memories don't ask permission. They arrive like evidence. And they remind you, very gently at first, that you have been living inside a story someone else was writing. Lauren did not arrive in my life like a villain. Villains are easy to identify. They are loud. Impatient. Transparent in their hunger. Lauren arrived like refinement. The first time Brian brought her to dinner, she paused just inside my doorway, not from hesitation, but from assessment. Her eyes moved lightly across the room, the artwork on the walls, the age of the wood floors, the placement of furniture. She did not stare. She catalogued. People who build companies learn to read environments quickly. They search for leverage without appearing to search at all. She wore a cream silk blouse and understated earrings. Nothing excessive. Nothing careless. Her perfume was subtle, expensive without announcing itself. When she shook my hand, her grip was firm. Not aggressive. Not soft. Measured. That half-second longer than necessary. Power often lives in half-seconds. You've built such a beautiful life, she said, glancing around the dining room. It sounded like admiration. But I felt something beneath it. Inventory. I ignored it. Older women are often accused of misreading ambitious younger ones. I did not want to become that stereotype, the suspicious mother threatened by youth. She complimented my cooking. She asked about Chicago. She listened carefully when I described my years consulting in logistics, asking specific questions about scaling operations, about infrastructure inefficiencies, about supply chain vulnerability during downturns. Not idle curiosity. Strategic interest. She was mapping me. The first crack appeared months later. We were having dinner at their apartment. I used the word between when the correct word was among. A trivial slip. The kind that evaporates mid-sentence. Lauren smiled gently. It's among, actually. Her tone was warm. Her volume was not. The table paused. She touched my wrist as she corrected me, a gesture meant to soften the blow. But the gesture was not soft. It was placement. Correction disguised as intimacy. Brian laughed lightly, trying to dissolve the moment. But something shifted. From that evening forward, I felt repositioned. No longer Brian's equal. No longer even a neutral presence. I had become something to refine. Or dismiss. Small comments accumulated like fine dust. "Your wife doesn't really understand how venture capital works," she once told Brian while I was setting down plates. "She comes from a different era. A different era." I had negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts when most of her peers were still learning to type. I had survived 3 recessions, watched companies collapse under the weight of overconfidence, seen brilliant men reduced to footnotes by poor oversight. But I did not correct her. Silence is often more revealing than argument. Brian began visiting less frequently. Calls shortened. When I asked about the company, responses became polished. "Everything's growing. Lots of moving parts. Hard to explain unless you're in it." I stopped asking. Instead, I observed. Lauren's company grew quickly. Too quickly. Growth itself is not suspicious. But growth without visible friction is. Every funding round was accompanied by language about independence. "We built this without legacy networks. We never relied on outside influence. We are entirely self-made." Self-made. The phrase repeated across interviews, across press releases, across social media. Repetition signals defense. The anonymous email arrived quietly. 3 words. "Check Silver Ridge Consulting." No greeting. No signature. I almost dismissed it. But instinct, that quiet muscle strengthened over decades, told me to look. Silver Ridge Consulting had no website. No visible employees. No public footprint. Yet it appeared repeatedly in vendor disbursements. Consistent payments. Small enough not to alarm. Regular enough to accumulate. The incorporation date was precise. 48 hours after Lauren's Series B announcement. The registered agent was her personal assistant. The address traced to a shared workspace leased under a holding entity. Clean. Too clean. Reckless people steal loudly. Careful people redirect. I began archiving. Screenshots of filings before quarterly updates. Vendor payment patterns. Incorporation documents. Revenue inflows aligned with advisory outflows. Always labeled strategic consulting. Never itemized. Never detailed. Capital entered. Capital exited. In measured percentages. I attended one of her investor presentations months later. She stood beneath white stage lighting and said, "Integrity is not optional." The applause filled the room. Brian looked at her as if she had rewritten gravity. I watched her hands. Still. No tremor. Confidence can come from innocence. Or rehearsal. Afterward, one board member avoided my eye contact. Another left early. Her assistant resigned abruptly 2 weeks later. An early investor quietly reduced equity. Signals. Soft. Persistent. Patterns do not shout. They repeat. Back on the rooftop, when Ethan calmly spoke the name Silver Ridge Consulting, Lauren's composure fractured. Only for a breath. But fear has a specific shape. Her shoulders tightened. Her smile sharpened. Her fingers wrapped around her glass too firmly. "That's a legitimate advisory partner," she said smoothly. Ethan did not blink. Clarification should be straightforward. Brian looked at me. Confusion first. Then suspicion. "Why are you involved in this?" he asked under his breath. "Because someone needed to be." But I answered evenly. "Due diligence." Lauren laughed. Thin. Controlled. "Are we seriously discussing vendor relationships during a celebration dinner?" Ethan's tone remained neutral. Transparency does not depend on setting. The atmosphere shifted from celebration to audit in seconds. Phones appeared beneath the table. Postures stiffened. Lauren had believed she controlled the evening. She believed perception was hers to manage. She believed she could reduce me to an outdated ornament and proceed untouched. What she did not understand was this. I was raised by a man who built empires without spectacle. I learned to observe before acting. To collect before confronting. To wait until movement became unnecessary because evidence already spoke. Her first mistake was laughter. Her second mistake was assuming age equals irrelevance. Her third mistake was forgetting that the quietest person in the room is often the one who has already calculated the cost of every outcome. And once I calculated the cost, I understood exactly who would pay it. The rooftop no longer felt elevated. It felt exposed. The music was still playing somewhere behind us, soft strings floating above the city, but the sound now felt disconnected from reality, like it belonged to a different evening entirely. Ethan remained standing. He did not raise his voice. He did not dramatize the moment. That made it worse. Silver Ridge Consulting, he repeated, each word placed carefully. Can you clarify the ownership structure? Lauren did not blink. It's a strategic advisory firm, she said smoothly. They assist with expansion modeling and vendor negotiations. Her tone was steady. Controlled. But I noticed something small, the way her right hand tightened around the stem of her glass. The knuckles were pale. Who are the principals? Ethan asked. A distributed team, she replied. External. Contract-based. Names still did not come. Ethan did not nod. He did not challenge her immediately. Instead, he glanced toward his legal advisor, who had quietly approached the edge of the table during Ethan's phone call. That glance carried weight. Not suspicion. Confirmation. Brian shifted beside me. I could feel tension radiating from him now, no longer directed at me, but at the space between us all. Why is this coming up tonight? He asked, trying to regain control of the narrative. Because tonight the illusion cracked, I thought. Because you underestimated the wrong variables. But I said nothing. Ethan finally lowered himself into his chair, though his posture remained upright. I stepped away to consult with compliance, he said. Certain overlapping registration details were flagged. Lauren's jaw tightened, just slightly. That must be a clerical error. Perhaps, Ethan replied evenly. Which is why we'll need documentation. Documentation. The word changed the oxygen around the table. Documentation means paper trails. Paper trails mean exposure. Brian turned toward Lauren now, not toward me. Is there something I don't know? He asked quietly. There it was. The fracture. Lauren's eyes flickered, only for a second, and in that second I saw calculation move behind them. She was deciding whether to minimize or confront. Of course not, she said quickly. This is routine compliance. Routine. Nothing about this felt routine. I unlocked my phone beneath the table. The folder was still there. Months of quiet patience contained in neat files. I had never planned to speak publicly. I had hoped Lauren would correct course quietly. That she would realize the slope she was standing on. But some people only change when gravity forces them. Ethan's legal advisor stepped forward and placed a thin tablet on the table. We've identified structural overlap between Silver Ridge Consulting and internal personnel tied to your company, he said calmly. Lauren leaned forward. That's inaccurate. The advisor rotated the screen. Incorporation under your assistant's name. Shared IP registration address. Recurring advisory disbursements following capital infusion. The board members went silent. One of them removed his glasses slowly. Brian looked at the screen. And I watched something shift inside him. Not outrage. Not defense. Disorientation. His loyalty had always followed proximity. Tonight proximity was dissolving. He turned to me. What do you know? He asked. This time, it was not accusation. It was genuine uncertainty. I met his eyes. Enough, I said quietly. Lauren's composure cracked. "How long have you been investigating me?" she demanded. The word investigating hung in the air like smoke. "I observe patterns," I replied. "That's not the same thing." Her laugh was sharp now. "This is sabotage. You're embarrassing the family." I slid my phone across the table. Slowly. Intentionally. "Silver Ridge was formed 48 hours after your Series B announcement," I said evenly. "Funds redirected in consistent percentages aligned with capital entry." Ethan's advisor nodded once. "These figures align with what we've identified." Align. The word felt final. Lauren's breathing changed. For the first time that evening, she looked younger. Less composed. The polished exterior beginning to crack under pressure. "It's advisory structuring," she insisted. "Perfectly legal." "Then documentation will confirm that," Ethan said, rising from his seat. He adjusted his jacket calmly. "This dinner is concluded." Chairs shifted. Board members stood abruptly. Phones were no longer discreet. The skyline remained beautiful, indifferent to collapse. Lauren stood so quickly her napkin fell to the floor. "This isn't over," she hissed toward me. I felt something unexpected then. Not triumph. Stillness. "You lifted my hand," I said quietly. I didn't raise my voice. Brian remained seated. He stared at the ring resting on the white tablecloth. The pink diamond caught the candlelight again. He looked at it differently now. Not as decoration. As context. "Who are you?" he asked. The question did not hurt. It clarified him. "I'm the same woman I've always been," I replied. "You simply never asked." Lauren disappeared toward the stairwell, heels striking too sharply against the floor. Ethan left with his advisor. The celebration dissolved into whispers and hurried departures. Brian finally stood. "You should have told me," he said. "Told you what?" I asked gently. "That integrity has a cost?" He did not answer. Because the truth was heavier than accusation. And as the rooftop emptied and the music finally stopped, I understood something with complete certainty. The exposure had only begun. And this time I would not carry the blame for someone else's ambition. The rooftop emptied in layers. First the board members, quiet, careful, already on their phones. Then Lauren's parents, pale and stunned, whispering urgently to one another. Finally the staff began clearing plates that had barely been touched, their movements suddenly brisk, professional, detached from whatever storm had passed across the table. Only a few of us remained. Lauren stood near the stairwell, phone pressed tightly to her ear. Her voice was low but sharp, each word clipped with controlled fury. Brian had not moved. He was still staring at the ring. The pink diamond lay on the white tablecloth like an accusation. Candlelight passed through it in faint pulses, as if it were breathing. Ethan's legal advisor spoke quietly beside him, outlining next steps: review, temporary pause, internal audit, documentation request. The language was calm, procedural. But procedural language destroys empires more efficiently than anger ever could. Lauren ended her call and walked back toward the table. Her composure had shifted. The brightness was gone. What remained was calculation. "This is being blown out of proportion," she said, voice steadier now. "We'll provide documentation in the morning." "There's nothing illegal." Ethan regarded her evenly. "I sincerely hope that's the case." Hope. Investors do not rely on hope. They rely on verification. Lauren's gaze moved to me. There was no laughter now. Only something colder. "You had no right," she said quietly. I met her eyes. "I had no voice," I replied. "Until you lifted my hand." For a moment, silence thickened again. Then something unexpected happened. A guest from another table, someone who had clearly been filming part of the earlier exchange, approached hesitantly. "I'm sorry," he said, holding up his phone. But I think parts of that conversation are already circulating. Lauren's face drained of color. Ethan did not react outwardly. Circulating where? He asked. Private investment chat groups, the man replied. Someone tagged Silver Ridge. It takes only seconds for doubt to travel. Minutes for markets to respond. Lauren's phone buzzed again. And again. Her breathing changed. Brian finally stood. What is happening? He demanded. No one answered immediately. Because the answer was visible. Exposure. Not theatrical. Not explosive. Methodical. Ethan turned toward his advisor. Freeze movement on this round until further notice, he said. Lauren stepped forward sharply. You can't do that. I can, he replied calmly. And I will. Her composure fractured completely then. This is sabotage, she snapped. You're letting family drama interfere with business. Family drama. The phrase hung in the air like a weak defense. Ethan's expression did not change. Financial irregularities are not drama, he said. They are risk. The word risk is lethal in investment circles. Lauren's shoulders squared. For the record, she said, voice now hard, Silver Ridge was established for operational flexibility. Operational flexibility? The advisor repeated. Yes. I reached across the table and gently lifted the ring. The candlelight shifted again as it left the linen. I believe transparency offers better flexibility, I said quietly. Brian looked at me. For the first time that evening, there was no accusation in his eyes. Only realization. You knew, he whispered. I suspected, I corrected. Lauren's phone buzzed again. Her screen lit up repeatedly. Notifications. Messages. Alerts. The speed of digital consequence is merciless. Ethan stepped back from the table. This conversation will continue in a formal setting, he said. Tonight is concluded. He extended a small nod toward me, not gratitude, not alliance. Acknowledgement. Then he walked toward the exit. The rooftop lights seemed dimmer now. Lauren stood frozen, staring at her phone as if it had betrayed her personally. Brian turned toward her. Tell me this isn't true, he said. Lauren did not look up. I'll fix it, she muttered. Fix. The word felt hollow. There are some fractures that cannot be repaired because they reveal structure. Brian looked back at me. And I understood something with absolute clarity. The exposure had moved beyond our table. Beyond family. Beyond embarrassment. It had entered the world that Lauren valued most. Reputation. And reputation, once questioned publicly, does not return quietly. I slipped the ring back onto my finger. Not as a declaration. As a reminder. Hidden things eventually surface. And when they do not ask permission. There was no screaming. That was the strangest part. After Ethan left and the rooftop began to empty, the night didn't explode into drama the way people expect in stories. It simply cooled. Like a pan pulled off heat, still dangerous to touch, but no longer making noise. Lauren stood near the stairwell with her phone in her hand, staring at the screen as if she could will the notifications to stop arriving. The blue light washed her face in a color that made her look almost ill. Her parents hovered a few steps behind her, whispering urgently, trying to sound calm while failing. Brian didn't follow her. He stayed with me at the table, as if his legs had forgotten how to move. The waiter approached cautiously to ask if we wanted anything else. Water, perhaps. Dessert. A car called. Brian stared at him as if the man had spoken a language he didn't recognize. No, I said softly. Thank you. The waiter nodded and retreated, grateful to escape whatever tension had settled over us. For a moment, the two of us sat in silence with the city lights behind us. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of the ocean and car exhaust and someone's expensive perfume from a nearby table that was still laughing, still living inside an ordinary evening. I touched my ring. It was back on my finger, snug and familiar, the way it had been for decades. Not heavy in weight, heavy in meaning. Brian finally spoke. "What did you just do?" he asked, voice low. Not angry. Not even accusatory now. Lost. "I told the truth," I replied. "You humiliated her." I turned to him slowly. "She humiliated me first," I said. "Publicly. On purpose." Brian's jaw tightened, as if that detail had not been recorded in his mind the way it had been recorded in mine. "She was joking," he insisted, weakly. "No," I said. "She was signaling. There's a difference." He leaned back in his chair and covered his mouth with his hand, staring at the skyline as if searching for a way to rewind the evening. His wedding ring caught the light. I noticed, suddenly, that he had grown used to being watched only when he was successful. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. The question landed with a weight it didn't deserve. Because he hadn't asked sooner. Because he hadn't listened when I tried, in smaller ways. I kept my voice calm. "Because I needed to know something," I said. He looked at me, blinking slowly. "I needed to know if you would stand beside me without knowing my last name," I continued. "Not because I wanted to test you for sport. Because I wanted to understand what our marriage was built on." Brian's shoulders sagged. "That's not fair," he whispered. I almost smiled. Fair. He had sat beside me for years while people like Lauren corrected me, dismissed me, reduced me to a harmless detail. He had benefited from my quietness without ever wondering what it cost. Was it fair, I asked gently, to assume I was small simply because I didn't perform importance? He didn't answer. Because the answer was not flattering. Lauren returned to the table briefly, not to speak to us, but to grab her purse. Her eyes flicked toward my hand, toward the ring, toward the calm on my face. For a moment I saw something like fear behind her irritation, fear of the unknown, fear of what else I might know. Then she turned away and walked toward the exit without looking back. Brian watched her go. He did not chase her. That silence between us, the choice not to move, was louder than any argument. We rode the elevator down without speaking. The glass walls reflected our faces back at us in fragments, his pale, mine composed. In the lobby, the air smelled of marble and flowers and money. Outside, the cold hit my skin and cleared my head. Brian's car was waiting. When he opened the passenger door for me, it felt automatic, like a gesture he performed because he had rehearsed being a good husband. I sat anyway. The leather seat was cold. The dashboard lights glowed softly. "Halfway home," he said, "so what now?" I looked out the window at the dark streets sliding past. "Now," I replied, "we stop pretending." The next morning, there were messages. From Lauren. From her mother. From a board member. From a number I didn't recognize that belonged, I later learned, to a crisis management firm. Brian received calls too. He didn't answer most of them. He sat at the kitchen table with his phone face down, staring at the wood grain as if it held instructions. 2 weeks later, we filed for separation. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, no slammed doors, no shouting. Just paperwork. Quiet signatures. The soft, humiliating scrape of pens across paper. And when I left the lawyer's office that day, I stepped into the sunlight and realized something that surprised me. I could breathe. Not because I had won. Because I had finally stopped shrinking. That night, at home alone, I placed my father's ring on the dresser and looked at it for a long time. The diamond did not sparkle in the dark. It simply existed. Solid. Patient. Unapologetic. So did I. 3 months after that dinner, my life did not look triumphant. It looked quiet. There were no magazine interviews about resilience. No dramatic reinvention. No speeches about empowerment. Just mornings that began without tension sitting in my chest. The first morning in my new office, I arrived early. The hallway lights were still dim, motion sensors waking slowly as I walked past. The suite was modest, glass door, neutral carpet, walls still faintly scented with fresh paint. The windows overlooked a brick building across the street. Nothing glamorous. I chose it intentionally. I did not want spectacle. I wanted structure. I carried in a single box. Legal pads. My old fountain pen. A framed photograph of Chicago in winter. And a thin folder labeled simply, Foundations. I placed the folder in the top drawer and locked it. Not because anyone would steal it. Because I no longer shared everything by default. The ring was on my hand. Not for display. For alignment. Ethan called exactly 7 days after Brian and I signed the separation documents. His tone was steady, but more measured than before. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Not for the audit. For the environment." I didn't soften it for him. "It revealed what it needed to reveal," I replied. Silence held for a moment. Then he asked, "What are you building?" The question felt different from curiosity. It felt like recognition. "A firm," I said. "Small. Focused. Real assets. Infrastructure. Logistics. Companies that move things, not headlines." He exhaled slowly. "Send me your framework." When he arrived at my office the following week, he came alone. No assistant. No legal advisor. No performance. He studied the room before sitting down. "You're not scaling fast," he observed, glancing at the projected growth charts. "No," I said. "I'm scaling correctly." He smiled faintly. We discussed capital discipline. Risk modeling. Governance structures that required transparency by design, not by promise. I spoke clearly. Without rushing. Without shrinking my language. When I finished, he closed the folder. "I'll anchor it," he said. I nodded once. No celebration. No visible relief. But when he left, I sat alone in that quiet office and allowed myself one long breath. Not because I had won something. Because I had reclaimed something. I called Nicole that afternoon. Nicole and I had worked together years ago in Chicago. She was precise without being cold. The kind of woman who reads contracts line by line even when others skim. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said when she answered. "I need a COO," I told her. "What you need," she replied calmly, "is someone who won't flatter you." Yes. And someone who won't let you overcorrect out of pride. I smiled. Exactly. She joined within a month. The office began to breathe differently then. Coffee brewed at 8. Reviews at 9. Calls in the afternoon. Conversations that challenged instead of echoed. We hired slowly. Each person vetted not just for skill, but for steadiness. No urgency-driven hiring. No ego-driven titles. Meanwhile, Lauren's world narrowed. The investigation expanded. What began as a compliance review evolved into a deeper audit. The language in the press shifted from optimistic to cautious, then from cautious to clinical. Silver Ridge Consulting became a footnote in financial articles. Then a headline. Then a liability. Her company filed for bankruptcy quietly. Not in flames. In paperwork. Board resignations. Vendor withdrawals. Strategic dissolutions. The machinery of collapse is rarely dramatic. It is administrative. Brian took a position at a smaller firm. Less visibility. Less authority. More accountability. He called once, months later. "I should have listened," he said. It wasn't a full apology. But it was closer to truth than he had ever been. "I hope you do now," I replied. We did not discuss reconciliation. Some distances are respectful. As for me, I no longer enter rooms anticipating correction. I no longer brace myself to be tolerated. When I sit at a table, I sit fully. The ring catches light sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't. It does not matter. It reminds me that value is not determined by recognition. Hidden diamonds remain diamonds. They do not become precious when someone finally notices. They are precious regardless. And now, when someone laughs lightly at what they do not understand, I do not shrink. I observe. I measure. And if necessary, I speak. Quietly. Because quiet power does not need to raise its voice. It only needs to exist. I did not destroy her. I simply refused to protect her illusion. There is a difference. For years, I believed silence was grace. I believed shrinking myself made rooms more comfortable. I believed love required invisibility. It does not. Sometimes the quietest person at the table is not weak. She is watching. And sometimes the most dangerous mistake you can make is laughing at what you do not understand. Names and details in this story have been changed for privacy. If you have ever been underestimated, tell me where you're listening from. I read every message. And if this story reminded you of your own strength, stay with me. There are more truths I haven't told yet.